Okay, let's dive right into this. If you deal with diabetes, you know this feeling all too well, the dreaded hypo hangover. It's that awful, frustrating mental fog, that feeling of being slow and just fuzzy that seems to stick around forever, long after you've treated a low blood sugar. You've done everything right. You had your juice, your glucose tabs, and your meter finally says you're back in a safe range, so why does your brain still feel like it's stuck in mud? Well, we're going to unpack the science behind this disconnect and look at why your brain's recovery is way more complicated than just adding a little sugar. And this isn't just you imagining things. This is a real, documented physiological thing. Clinical studies have actually shown that your cognitive function, your memory, your reaction time, your ability to think clearly, can stay impaired for a surprisingly long time. We're talking up to 75 minutes after your blood sugar levels are back to normal. That's a huge chunk of your day to feel off.
To really get why this happens, we first have to understand our brain's very unique and incredibly demanding relationship with energy. You got to think of it like an engine that is always on. It never stops.
Think about it this way. Your muscles? They can store energy for later, kind of like a small backup battery. Your brain? No, it can't do that. It has pretty much zero fuel reserves. It is completely, 100% dependent on a constant, second-by-second delivery of glucose from your bloodstream to power every single thing it does. So, when that fuel line gets cut off, even for a short time during a hypo, things start to go wrong. So when that fuel supply gets interrupted during a low, it doesn't just, pause things. It actually kicks off a damaging chain reaction inside your brain cells. And scientists now have a name for this whole mess, the hypoglycemia brain energy bottleneck. So here's how that bottleneck actually forms. First, the super low glucose triggers these stress signals. These signals flip on an enzyme called PARP1. Now, you can think of PARP1 as an emergency responder that, in its total panic, just chews through the cell's supply of another vital molecule, NAD+. And without enough NAD+, the main assembly line for using glucose, a process called glycolysis, it just grinds to a halt. The whole machinery breaks down. The spark plug analogy for NAD+ is absolutely perfect. So after the hypo, you've refilled the gas tank by eating carbs, right? But that PARP1 activation has basically ripped out all the spark plugs. The fuel is there, but the engine is totally crippled and it just can't use it efficiently. This is the reason you still feel so foggy even when your meter says you're good to go. This all leads to a really fascinating question. If the main energy highway is totally blocked, can we find a detour? Is there some way to get fuel to the brain's power plants using a different route? Well, it turns out the answer is a big yes. The idea here is actually pretty simple, but it's really powerful. The main highway for glucose is blocked, total gridlock. But these alternative fuels, like the ketone BHB and lactate, they don't even need that highway. They can take a completely different route, bypassing that whole energy bottleneck and delivering fuel straight to the cell's power plants, the mitochondria. And look, this isn't just some clever theory on a whiteboard. There is a growing mountain of scientific evidence, from animal models all the way to real-world human studies, that shows this metabolic bypass idea really truly works. Let's see how the evidence stacks up, starting with those foundational lab studies where scientists could really put this hypothesis to the test. The impact here is just, wow, it's striking. In rat models of severe hypoglycemia, when researchers gave only glucose for recovery, they saw a ton of neuronal death. But, and this is the amazing part, when they added an alternative fuel with the glucose, they reduced that neuronal death by up to 90%. That is a staggering difference. Okay, that's awesome in the lab. But what about in people? Does it work for us? Well, thankfully, a bunch of controlled human studies have put this exact idea to the test. And the results are just so consistent. When people in these studies were given alternative fuels like BHB or lactate during a low, they didn't just say they felt better. Their actual objective brain function, their attention, their reaction time, even their memory recovered way faster than it did with glucose alone. So all this amazing research didn't just stay in the lab. A product was actually developed based on this very principle, combining glucose with the building blocks for those alternative fuels, BHB and lactate. The whole approach is known as a multi-energy substrate for hypoglycemia, or MESH rescue. So when this MESH product was studied in over 1,000 real-world hypo episodes, guess what? Users reported exactly what the science predicted they would. They had fewer repeat lows, they stayed in their target glucose range longer, and, most importantly, they said they had a faster resolution of those foggy brain symptoms and that awful fatigue. So what does all this evidence mean for you and me? Well, it's really pointing towards a fundamental shift in how we should be thinking about treating hypoglycemia. It's about moving way beyond just fixing a number on a meter.
Right now, the standard of care is all about correcting blood glucose with just sugar. But this proposed mesh strategy is so much more ambitious. Yeah, correct the blood glucose, for sure, but also address the brain cell's energy crisis by giving it that bypass fuel. The real goal isn't just to normalize your blood sugar, it's to get your brain back online as fast as humanly possible. And all this leads to one big final question. If the ultimate goal of treating a low isn't just to make a number go up, but to feel better and to think clearly again as quickly as possible, then all this research is suggesting that maybe, just maybe, sugar alone isn't the complete answer anymore. And that's a question that could really change the future of diabetes care.